Module last week, umbrella.
Yeah, basically, I read the experience about the first half was it's relative.
And they just said that, yeah.
Okay, guys. Now this is gonna be the last module of this unit. We're almost there. As usual, before we start, just to quickly recap what we had last week. And these two modules are very much related. What we had last week?
Environmental transport, environmental packaging.
Yep. What kind of impact?
Social and
Social and environmental impact? What else? More specific. What kind of environmental impact?
pollution to
Air pollution? Yeah.
water pollution, maritime.
Yeah. Marine. Yeah. Pollution from maritime. Yeah. Well, this is the consequence. The consequence of the pollution, because in the middle you have greenhouse emission, and then increase the temperature, then you have sea level rising. With air pollution, do you remember anything particular? Say, well, when we look at those pollutants, can you actually remember or think of any pollutants, specific pollutants we mentioned in the slides? There are lots of pollutants from burning fossil fuel.
Carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide.
Yeah.
Lots of different oxides, sulfur oxide.
Yeah. Yeah.
Acid rain.
Yeah. So when you have carbon dioxide, you have carbon monoxide as well. So these two always there. Now with the pollution, what's the upside of the previous step before you have the pollution? We talked about
Energy consumption.
energy consumption. Yes. So you need to remember energy consumption for the transport and for the whole transport process, and roughly how energy consumptions actually consumption distributes into different stages of the transport. And also, do you remember anything or roughly in terms of the fuel consumption between transport modes, between freight transport and the passenger transport? Just a rough idea. Yes,
Passenger transport was very high for the amount of cargo it carries.
So fuel consumption for passenger transport is much higher than the freight transport.
Like for the amount of freight it transports is very high compared to other transport modes. So that 60 to 70% of total energy only carries 30 to 40% of freight transport. Compared to maritime, 90%. I'm only using 7%.
So you're comparing the transport modes for freight transport.
Yeah, based on the total
The fuel consumption.
Yeah.
And also the amount of cargo actually moved. Yes. So when it comes to fuel consumption, we have a range of numbers, percentages. Now, once again, I don't expect you to remember accurately the numbers, but you need to roughly understand, well, fuel consumption for passenger travel much more than the freight side. And across different transport mode, maritime transport, because this is a part of your degree, so the fuel consumption in the maritime transport is much lower than other transport modes. Than road, compared to road, but the actual freight, or in terms of international trade, we have those different numbers. Sometimes you see up to 95%. Well, most likely you see the number 90% of the world trade in volume. So in actual volume, not in value, right? Not in value. So roughly you remember, okay, we'll carry 90% of the world trade in volume, but the fuel consumption, the percentage of fuel consumption is lower than the road transport. Road transport consumes more energy. And then right to the energy consumption, you look at between transport modes. And specifically, we have the option of using alternative energies, right? Now, when we can use alternative energies for transport. Now, which transport mode we can actually use this alternative energy?
At the moment, just road.
Road, yes. So how can we use alternative energy for road transport?
Use electric.
Electric, yes. Hybrid or electric, right? Full electric, yes. And
Or utilize passenger transport or public transport?
yeah, so this is when we actually reduce the energy consumption per passenger. But how about the alternative energy use? So in addition to road, can we actually use alternative energy for other? Yes, this is for road transport. Yeah, well, possibly we can actually, to some extent, we can apply it to the maritime, but certainly compared to other transport modes, it's much less. How about the rail transport? Can we use alternative energy?
Yeah.
Yes?
Maglobes.
Huh?
Make bullet trains, maglobes. Use electricity instead of like coal, I guess.
Yeah, so if we use the electrified system for rail, not the conventional diesel-driven train, then we have the opportunity to use alternative energy, right? So just remember, well, when we say alternative energy, one option is go for electricity, or other on road, full electric car or hybrid. For rail, we can use electrified rail system. So once again, we have the opportunity, not necessarily when we use electricity, well, there must be alternative. Well, we have the opportunity because electricity can be generated from different sources, right? And then we have also another opportunity, biofuel, right? Yeah? So we mentioned that we can possibly use biofuel. So it's not fossil fuel. And the biofuel also, there's something wrong with this. Biofuel is renewable because biofuel generated from plants. So they're not fossil fuel. And certainly in terms of pollution, well, zero pollution or much less. Now with all those impacts and also social impacts as well, what do you remember about the social impact?
In terms of pollution, especially smoke and on the small island countries.
Yeah. So that's a sort of still from the So if phrased differently, pollution caused by other countries will affect those small countries using less fossil fuel or generate less pollution, but they will be affected. We use the examples from island countries, right? They will be suffering the most if the sea level continue to rise, right? Now, if we phrase it different, then that's a social impact. That's inequity brought by transport development, and this is a social impact.
increased mobility.
Yeah, well, this is the positive side, increased mobility. But at the same time, we have the benefits of increased mobility because we can actually afford using our own car, or afford to use other means for transport infrastructure. But part of that thing, positive, you have the negative side is where we have those communities. People live in remote areas that cannot actually use public transport, for example, or they don't have the convenience of using air transport. They need to travel much longer than others. So once again, these are the social impacts. So when we look at those benefits, we need to look at whether those benefits actually being enjoyed equally by all people. And if not, there is a problem here. So these are part of what we call the social impact side. Now, with all those we discussed in last week, this week is about the transport planning and the policy. So the purpose here is we need to understand that what policy or how policy can be actually developed to reduce the environmental and the social impact as we discussed in the last module. And the effects of regulation and deregulation on transport. Regulation, deregulation, we mentioned a few times in this module. And what and how can technology be used in transport planning. So we have policy, regulation, planning. Now, these are the topics. Before we go into it, let's just imagine, just based on what we have identified in last week and some of those things we mentioned already. Now with the pollution thing, now what we can do to reduce the pollution or reduce the environmental impact side, because the environmental impact mainly is about pollution to the air, pollution to the ocean, pollution to the water, right? Now how can we do, or what we can actually come up with to reduce that impact, environmental impacts? What do you think? How do we reduce air pollution to start with? How can we reduce? How can we reduce air pollution?
Control the emissions.
Okay, good. So control, because that's basically the problem, where the problem is. So control emission. How do we control emission?
Restrict on fuel. The restrict on the fuel based on the components of that fuel, about the content of nitrogen or content of.
So okay, so we do something on the actual fuel. Yes, that's the way to go. What else we can do? What else we can do? Now think about a bigger picture. When we say emission, air pollution, this is overall, this is bigger picture, high level. We're talking about the total air pollution, right? And we say, well, we control emission. This is a good idea because that's where the problem is. How do we do it? Well, one thing is we try to have a higher standard on the fuel. Well, this is happening in the maritime. Right? This is happening in the maritime. So they actually control the emission by setting higher standard, so less pollutants contained in the fuel. So this is one thing. Now what are others? What are others?
Restrict the number of vehicles on the roads.
Yes, good. How do we restrict this? We can't just say we don't allow that many vehicles on road. How can we do in order for us to have less, or not say less? We can actually control or reduce the speed of increase, reduce the growth rate of traffic. Yes, that's a good idea. How do we do this? How do we control the traffic?
Implement a better public transport system.
Yes, good, great. This will provide the alternative means for people to travel, so they can say instead of using their own cars, they can use public transport. Yes, great. What else?
providing incentives for using alternative vehicles that don't cause.
Yes, absolutely. So we use those electric, full electric or hybrid cars, so the emission will be less.
Develop new engines airplanes use, so instead of using the jets, which
Yeah. So we improve the technology, engine technology, make engines probably more efficient, and the less pollution. What else? So we're covering quite a lot here. What else we can do?
Higher taxes on vehicles that cause more pollution.
Yeah. Well, we can impose tax on cars that actually emits high level of pollutants. Well, in some countries, in fact, there are very strict regulation in terms of the emission from each car. So once a car reaches to a certain age, and the emission will exceed the requirement, and therefore they have to be replaced. Now, in many countries, not in Australia. Australia don't have that requirement. So therefore, you see, cars with very different ages. Some are extreme age, but the emission probably not necessarily only relate to the age of the car, but lots of other things. But in some countries, this is very strict. In other countries, this is not. In Australia, we don't even look at the emission from each car. So we have quite a lot. And how about the social part? The social impact, and how can we actually reduce the social impact brought by transport? So let's go for the social impact. The safety side. What can we do to address the safety issue?
reduce speed limits.
Yes, most speed limits. Well, in residential areas, we try to reduce the speed. So we have in Australia, Tasmania at least, the highest speed you can go is 110. In mainland, do we have any areas with a speed limit of 120?
130 in NT.
130?
Speed limit in some roads. Nice speed limit in some roads.
Yeah. No speed limit in some areas. Yeah. And in residential areas, if we don't see a sign, what's the speed limit? You sure? In Tasmania, if you don't see a speed limit in residential area, that's default 50. How do we make sure that the speed actually controlled, especially in residential area or in school zones or shopping zones? What we do to force people to reduce their speed?
Speed cameras.
Yes, speed cameras. What else?
Speed bumps.
Yes, speed bumps. So that's normally, even around the campus here, you see that the speed bumps. It's just to force people to reduce the speed.
Traffic lights.
Hmm?
Traffic lights.
Yeah, well, traffic lights. You have to stop. Not necessarily will reduce your speed, but when there is a red light, you have to stop. So we come up with different means to control the speed, to regulate the speed, so to make it safer. Huh? What else we do to address the social impact of it? How about the inactive we discussed?
Bypassing around cities.
Well, this is probably more to do with the environmental impact. We actually provide the bypasses so vehicles don't need to get into the city centers. Instead, they go outside of the city. Yeah.
Upgrading road quality would be a social impact. It would limit the amount of car crashes anyway, like poor quality roads and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, this is certainly an important area, and sometimes this is neglected, or sometimes it can't be done because of the resources there. So we try to actually provide a good infrastructure to maintain safety. Now this is one thing is to do with the safety. So we make it safer for people driving on those roads. Another thing is well, it's probably even more efficient when we provide a good infrastructure. All right, so pretty much we covered quite a lot. Now what we do in this module, we need to come up with some sort of solutions, but not just say well, how we directly address it, but at different levels. So we start from the policy level, and then we have regulation, and then we have actually planning long term, and then we have more detailed. So how do we control? How do we manage, not control, how do we manage the demand and the supply side? So that's what we do. So I'll just move fairly quickly today because we got a good idea already, very good ideas on what we actually needed to come up with. Now, as I said, we have different levels. So starting from the policy level. Now you always see the policies and the regulations, they are not the same, they're different. Well, policies are even higher level, and the policies normally, most of the time you see the policies as providing an overall direction. That's the direction we are going to move to. But policies normally not something enforceable, which means if you don't follow, there will be a penalty, or there will be a consequence. Not really. We need to have policy first, and then regulations as enforcement instrument. So we have regulations. Regulations are laws, and they are enforceable, which means if violated, there will be consequences. So you see the relationship. These two are different. Okay. So we need a policy first, right? We need a policy first. So if the policy is say, well, let's try to reduce the emission from private cars. Now, this is the overall policy. Well, from the government level, let's move towards this because we have an overall target carbon emission reduction by 2030. So the Morrison government just proposed the target for 2030 carbon emission reduction, or the carbon emission target for 2030. So just imagine if we have a policy say, well, as part of that strategy, well, let's reduce the emission from private cars. Well, this is an overall policy. With that policy, well, how do we enforce it? How can you achieve this? Well, you need to have regulations. Then you come up with say, well, how about say, well, let's look at those emissions from individual cars, and if they don't meet this standard, they need to be replaced. Now, this becomes regulations because it can be enforced. So the cars can be actually examined and checked. Well, what's the emission level? If this not meet the requirement, okay, well, you need to do something, or otherwise you replace your car. Now, this becomes enforceable, can be enforced, and if not followed, complied with, there will be a penalty. So that's the relationship between policy and regulations. Got that idea? Okay. Now, why transport policy? I'm not going to go through each of those. It's important because without policy, we don't know where we move and why we're moving towards that particular direction. Okay. And there are different means for the governments to actually come up with policies. So public ownership versus private. Well, we talk about public transport, but the ownership here will between public and private, right? This is the instrument the government can use, and the subsidies. Well, it can be infrastructure development, but also can be subsidies to actually to consumers. Now, in case of electric car, full electric car. Now, in some countries, subsidies are provided to the manufacturers, not directly to the consumers, but subsidies provided to the manufacturers of full electric cars, so they have the financial means to develop the technology and to provide the cars that are affordable. Now, when say affordable, not necessarily means well the cost plus the profit margin, and then eventually the price to the consumers, because the subsidies provided so they can make the price cheaper. So people will buy their products. Regulatory control on entry and exit pricing and the markets. Well, this is to do with the businesses. Well, businesses operating in those environments. So government can provide regulation. So the next one, regulation, the laws, etc. So we can actually control the entry, exit, the pricing. The process, the policy, there's a process you need to understand. Well, it's when we have a policy, right? Or when we have policies, well, they don't just come out from nowhere. There must be a process there. So the first thing will be problem definition. We have some problems. Well, we have a problem, and what the problem is, right? And then we needed to have very clear objective and options, right? What kind of objectives with the problems we have identified, what the objectives we want to achieve, and what are the options. So I'll come back to the pollution, the emission thing. We have a target, right? And we have the problem here is the emission, right? Emission from transport, or more specifically from private cars. What's the objectives? Or the objective could be said, well, let's reduce the emission from private cars by a certain percentage. And what are the options? The option one is say, well, regardless, we provide a line for the cars. If cars exceed the age of 15 years, they need to be replaced. Well, this is one option. The second option, well, let's not do this. Let's provide means to actually examine as part of any registration. So we actually check the cars and see if the emission meets the targets, meets the requirements. Well, this is the second option. Another option said, well, let's provide an incentive for people to actually move to electric car or hybrid cars. Well, this is option 3. So these are the options to actually help you to achieve the objective. See? And then the policy implementation, how you implement your policy. Well, as I said, the policy, you have the policy, having policies or having a policy is not good enough because you can't actually implement it. How do you implement it? Well, you then come up with established regulations, laws. So if you don't do this, that's the consequence. And then it becomes law and then can be enforced. And policy evaluation and the maintenance. Now, we don't just develop policies, then we forget it. We need to come back regularly to evaluate whether a particular policy is effective. Sometimes you think this is going to be a good policy, but when you actually put there after a year and then you find out, okay, well, nothing actually changed. You have made no difference at all. This policy is not good policy because the policy does not allow you to achieve the objectives. It doesn't make any difference. So you need to evaluate. So with the policy, then next thing is we have the regulations, right? Regulations from different perspectives. So roughly we can say, well, we have those economic regulations. This is about the quantity control. Now, affects the price charged for transport services, amount of services may be provided. Now, economic control, economic regulations. So what that means, well, we can have price control. Now, for public transport, well, we have the price set up. And this, not necessarily, the process of public transport, not necessarily a reflection of the market. Now, you are going to actually do other units. You need to have a very basic sense of the market, the price side, and as consumers, when you go and buy something, when you pay certain price, there is a reason for it. Why you're paying for this price? Well, the simplest one will be because the cost of this item is such, and the company or the retail wants to maintain this profit margin then equal to the price you pay. Now, sometimes not as simple as this, right? Now, you go to the supermarket, well, with the with some products you buy, sometimes it could be 20% of discount, sometimes could be up to 50% of discount, sometimes could be up to 70% of discount. Now, when you have this, well, there are different reasons for this, but part of that reason is promotion, which means they're not really reflecting on the actual cost of it, but rather with some other purposes. Right? Now, for the price controls here, with the price control, the main objective is to control the demand and the supply side. Now, this is not a reflection of the actual market. It's not. Now, if the actual market means, well, we leave it to the market, that's what we provide, and we leave it to the market to actually respond to what provided, and therefore a price. Now, think about it, airfare. So you look at just the air flights originated from or destinated to long system, and you check the price. Now, you can check the same flight, or a particular flight in the morning time at a different date in a week, and the price is different. Now, does that mean that the cost of operating the flight is different in different days? What do you think? Now, if you go to a website, right, you'll find certainly different airfares for exactly the same flight at different days of the week, right? Agree? You nodded, yeah, you agree, right? Does that mean the cost of operating that particular flight is different in different days? Yes or no?
Potentially based on fuel prices.
Well, you operate exactly the same flight, so the cost of operating that flight should be the same. You probably have a marginal difference as a result of different numbers of passengers on the flight, because the weight is different. But the overall cost, pretty much fixed cost is remain the same. But why you have very different airfare on different days of the week? Now, during Friday, you have much higher airfare compared to probably Wednesday. Why? Yes, because people want to stay in London, in Melbourne or somewhere for the weekend. That's why. And on Sunday afternoon, high price. Well, this is a reflection of the demand. It's not a reflection of the cost. So we have price control. Why we need price control? Well, because we wanted to actually regulate the demand and the supply. Subsidies, as I mentioned, in some cases we need to provide subsidies in order for a service to be provided. Licensing system, well, this is once again for road transport licensing. In Australia, we don't have this sense licensing. How can you need a license in order for you to actually buy a car, use a car? Well, as long as your car is registered. Well, there is no such thing as say, well, you can't register a car unless the car is not roadworthy, right? Now, as long as a vehicle is roadworthy, you will register it, right? Now, this is not necessarily the case in all the countries. Well, in many countries around the world, when you register a car, you need actually a license. Well, of course you need a license, but you need to pay a premium in order for you to actually use a car, to register your car. Singapore, for example. Anyone from Singapore? Well, very, very expensive, right? To have a car or have a plate for registration. In Australia, well, we take it for granted. There's no such thing that you have to pay for a premium in order to register a car. Well, direct ownership. Well, this is more to do with the infrastructure, right? Large infrastructure, especially. And then we have the social regulation side. This is the quality control. So the economical regulation is more about the quantity control, and then we have the social regulation on quality control. So we have different levels. We have local level, the road sign, speed, etc. we mentioned already. And then we have wider geographical level. So we have the infrastructure planning, which we'll cover. So what kind of infrastructure should be provided, and this is long term. It's not something that we are going to provide a double lane for the road from Launceston to Hobart. Now you need to plan this, and this is happening still now between Launceston and Hobart. You see the road work, or much of the road work actually is to expand the single direction, well, not single direction, single lane for each direction to actually double lanes for each direction. Now this not happening at the same time, say, well, let's do it just in one go. No, they got a budget there. So in this year, they do this section, next year, they do another section. When they have money, they do another section. Eventually, after probably 10 years, we have 2 lanes for both directions. And that's the planning, right? We need to look at, well, what resources we have. And in other major infrastructure, we always have plan. We need to plan, okay? Now sometimes it happens very fast. Sometimes it happens very slow. Very slow. We can find examples of very fast major infrastructure development. And if you go and search the website, and there should be lots of discussion about the new airport that just opened in Beijing. Now this happened within 4 years. A huge mega project, the largest airport, single infrastructure, single building in the world, and it happened within 4 years' time. So this 4 years' time for this kind of size of airport never happened before. Now, this is the construction period and plus the planning. It's long-term planning, but this kind of project requires very long-term planning. Okay? Global level, that's a reduced environmental impact. So marine pollution, for example, we have obviously for maritime transport, we have probably, it is one of the most regulated area, what we call most regulated area. We've got lots of conventions, internet conventions, regulations to actually control the possible impact on the marine environment and on the overall environment as well. I will have a website here, very interesting website. You can find all the policies, regulations in Australia, right to transport. So follow the website, and then once you are in the website, you'll find aviation, road transport, rail transport, maritime transport, so different areas, and then you will find all the policies, regulations. Okay? So why we need regulations? Why we need regulations? Well, okay, the first thing is to ensure that there will be provision of necessary service. And then tell you why there will be any chance that there is no service? Well, there are good chances that certain services will not be provided. Why?
There's no need for those services.
If there is no need for the service, we don't provide it. So we don't need to regulate. Why we need to say to ensure that there will be provision of necessary services. Why we don't provide a service when there is a need? Now, in a business world, if you are in a business, you operate a business, freight business, okay? And then you have a very remote community with only probably a dozen of households there. And the operating cost of providing that service for freight is very, very expensive. And probably you're not going to actually charge that much to cover your cost of providing that freight service. What do you do as a business?
Stop providing service.
Stop providing, right? Yeah? So you don't provide it because you're not going to make money. And that absolutely makes sense. For businesses, well, that absolutely makes sense because they only provide a service, a particular product. Well, a product could be just a service, unless they can make money out of it, one way or another. No, either directly from providing the service or through a subsidy provided by our government. Now, when we have a need, but it doesn't make a commercial sense, then we need regulations to ensure that service is provided. So that's why we need regulation. And also to ensure that transport providers do not pursue their own interests unfairly to the detriment of others. So need to be fair, either their customers or competitors. So we have consumer laws, we have also competition laws as well. So HCCC, for example, is an organization in Australia to oversee the business world, between the businesses and also between the businesses and the consumers, to protect the employees both economically and in terms of health and safety. So workplace health, safety, for example. So we needed this to control risk generated by operation of transport service, risk to the public, environment, risk, safety, security, etc. So we all need to have the regulations in order for us to actually achieve, address those. We have possible impacts, problems, risks associated with provision of transport. So that's why we need regulations that we can enforce to ensure that businesses actually comply with. Because if you don't have regulations, they always try to maximize their profit if they don't need to comply. Okay? And then we have also the other side. We have regulation and deregulation. And then the question is, well, we have regulations, then we deregulate. So what's the point? Well, because when we look at regulation and deregulation, we need to look at historically. So as time goes, economic situation, social environment change, evolve. That's why we need to look at the policies and also regulations. Now, regulations or laws are not something that's static. They just, once they develop, they're just sitting there forever. No, we need to come back to review those, evaluate whether those laws or regulations still relevant to the environment we live in today or in future. Now, deregulation is a response to the regulations, strict regulations we had before, because we found that the regulations we had before, and in terms of transport, for example, in the aviation industry, where we had very strict regulation on entry, and then we create a lot of problems because we have very limited number of airlines. So the airlines pretty much were in monopoly, which means they actually set up the price very high to the point that many consumers could not afford. Deregulation said, I'll remove the threshold, the entry point, or I'll reduce the entry point, so more operators can get into the airline industries, so there will be more operators in that space, so the competition level can actually increase. And that's exactly what deregulation means. This is just for aviation. For other sectors as well, in Australia, we had regulations where operators cannot own infrastructure across different transport modes. Right? Now, the part of the reason was monopoly, because operators could own bigger companies in the road sector and then rail sectors, because that's their own businesses, so they had much larger control, therefore monopoly. But eventually they realized now this actually, the regulation did more damage than good, because the regulation actually made the whole thing inefficient, because if they're not allowed to own across, right? Now, if you have a business, you can only operate in the road transport. You can't own anything in the road. Then create a problem. So the re-regulation then allow operators to actually own infrastructure or operation across. This makes the whole process more efficient. Okay, so this is in the across different transport modes. And then there's about regulation on the cross-state, right? Cross-state ownership and operation. So there are consequences of deregulation. The positive side, as I said, well, the positive of deregulation obviously is higher competition level, more efficient, but also at the same time, we have some negative consequences here. So abandonment of less profitable services. Well, I mentioned already, I asked you a question. If there is a need for a certain service, but you're not going to make any money, what do? Well, you don't provide a service. Well, that's exactly deregulation in the aviation industry, for example. Once again, for example, after deregulation, many of those flights are being actually abandoned. Well, no airlines would like to actually provide that service because they're not making any profit out of providing the service. Now that's a problem. That's a problem. Growth of hub and spoke system. This is probably considered as a positive outcome to much extent. Obviously, when we look at the advantage of hub and spoke system from the shipper's point of view and from the provider's point of view, right? Think about it. Well, what are the advantages, disadvantages of hub and spoke system from two different perspectives? Now, when you do the revision, you need to bring all this together. Think about this. Facilitation of intermodal transport. This is obviously a positive sign, right? As I mentioned, well, deregulation on the ownership of transport infrastructure or operation is a positive towards the intermodal operation because it's much easier for a business owning infrastructure or operation across different transport modes for them to actually work out a solution, overall solution for intermodal transport. Ease of entry to the transport industry. Well, obviously, you created more businesses in those areas, therefore high competition level. So it's a positive. Significant reduction of transport cost. I mentioned the airfare already, right? Because more airlines actually went into the industry, providing the flights, and they competed with each other. Well, the outcome of competition always price reduction as part of it. Of course, not only price reduction. There will be, service improvement, etc. Right? But price reduction is one of them. Low profitability due to oversupply and strong competition. So once again, in the transport industry, it's always because there's a time lag between you provide the service and then into the market, and then after a certain time, and then some businesses simply found too many competitors. So it's oversupply, right? Oversupply, business simply go bankrupt, and they out of the business, and then will be less business left. So it's a cycle. Business cycle always. So that's why I say you don't see all the businesses actually succeed. Some businesses will fail, and that's why you are sitting here, because you are going to in the business to make decisions to actually help the success, because you have the understanding. Transport planning. I'll probably stop here. We're going tight. I'll stop here. So let's have 10 minutes break. We'll come back 11. Okay, guys, we keep going. Transport planning. So we look at the policy, we look at the regulations, and now we look at the planning. Now, planning is not laws, right? It's a long-term strategy to look at what are some of the problems, what needed, and how we actually do it. How we do it. We have comparison of traditional and contemporary planning. The traditional planning process just focus on specific problems. So if there are some problems, there is a problem, we just come up with a solution to that problem. And more at local level, not addressed at higher or wider areas. It's very much specific. Obviously, we find there are some problems associated with this process because a specific problem can actually possibly relate to other problems or other things. So we needed to look at a higher level and wider area. So the contemporary planning look at not say well directly just what the problem is, therefore that's what we do to address that problem. We look at what exactly we want to achieve. So start from say well the goals and the objectives, right? So as I explained in the regulation and the policy, well what exactly we want to achieve and what are the options? Well, we don't just say, well, this problem, okay, well, because we have this problem, so this is a solution, this is what we do, so we can solve that problem. Well, it's simple, but not addressing long term. So the long term should look at well, what exactly what we want to achieve as overall, as a society, as a community. And then the options, we need to evaluate the options because there are always different options and you need to look at well, what exactly the benefits associated with each option, and then you come up with a decision. And you need to look at the actors, the institutions, stakeholders. Well, pretty much can be covered just using stakeholders. So who actually will be affected by this particular problem or by the solutions? Now this is very important because well, we need to have the support from the stakeholders, and we need to actually follow their interest. Otherwise, you go nowhere. Predicting the outcome. So we can use all different methods. Modeling be one of those. Well, if we use this option, what's the outcome? What's the outcome? So we need to look at and say, well, compare those options and the possible outcomes, and look at what's the benefit, what's the cost. So this is related to the option bit. And then choose the course of action. Once you have done all those, then you say, well, you are clear. So that's what we want to do. Now, from the website here, from the Australia government, the framework, transport planning. Now, very good framework here. Just an example in relation to the policy regulations, and the planning process. So we have the policy here, we have very clear goals here, and then the objectives, and that's the steps you need to follow. Now, along the steps, what you can see here is you have, say, the feedback review and the process improvement. So this is a continual process. It's not say, well, once we reach to this stage, then we start seeking feedback or input from the stakeholders. Now it's too late. We start right from the beginning, and overall, the entire process, across the entire process, you have that communication. So you need to have stakeholder engagement. You need to constantly collect the data, evidence. You need to assess, appraisal. You need to have the benefit management evaluation. So these two across the entire process, and this is modern planning, and especially for infrastructure, transport infrastructure. Okay? Now when you look at what's in there here, the planning, policy choices and system planning here, you'll find actually this is not targeting a specific problem, but rather it's much wider. That's much wider. So looking at, you see, for example, network, corridor, and area. So this is not a specific problem. This is much, much wider. And they have the route link. So you look at overall, and the overall objectives and the goals. So we finished the policy, regulation, planning. Now we look at the demand, the demand and the supply side of the management. Management of transport demand and the supply. And probably you ask how we possibly can manage the supply, right? Because that's what we provide, the service we provide, the amount of the service we provide, so we can manage it, right? How do we manage demand? Well, it sounds like, well, you have no control on the demand because you can't control consumers' behavior. Well, there are means actually we can somehow manage demand. So, for example, park and ride. So this is to do with the congestion relief in city centers. Now, even like small cities like Launceston, very small city, a small town, very small population. But we also have this one, park and ride. Now, well, this is pretty much to address the traffic in the CBD area. Although very small area of CBD, what we call CBD. But because we don't want heavy traffic in the area and we have very limited space for parking. So we try to encourage drivers not to bring their cars into the CBD. But you can't just say, you can't bring your car into the CBD. People don't want to walk long. 500 meters or a kilometer. People simply feel like too much. So when you want to do something, you need to provide something in order for the people to follow what we do. So for the case of Launceston, we provide park and ride, which means we'll provide a big area in the Imrisk area. So that's just next to the University Imrisk campus. So there is a ground area, a relatively large area where drivers can park their cars there, and a relatively cheap parking fee, right? And then they provide free bus services. So drivers can take a bus free to the cities, to the CBD center. So solve the problem, right? So not so many cars go into the city area. So many people actually choose that one. They park their cars in the area and then they take the bus free. In other large cities, obviously, many cities actually use this one, especially for those actually very larger, those metropolitan cities, and this is very effective. Traffic calming, we mentioned already. The speed bump, well, how this is to do with the demand side? Well, it's the control of the traffic. It's the control of the traffic, and the purpose here is, well, let's say, well, instead of you provided, most of the time we want to provide a very smooth driving, right? But if there is a need to control the speed, we do this. And the speed camera obviously is another option here. If you set up a sort of 50 kilometers as the speed limit, and then you have the cameras. But this is more complicated when you have speed cameras. And sometimes people don't like it. Obviously, they exceed. They say, well, 1 kilometer, and they get caught and they get fined. It's more complicated. Priority lanes for buses and high occupancy vehicles. We talk about public transport, right? Now, providing public transport is one thing, but how we make it actually provide more benefits by using the public transport. So for large cities, well, in private cars, you probably get stuck in the traffic. But then you have the bus lanes, which is not congested. It's always smooth, because only bus can use the lanes at a certain time in the day. So this provides benefits for the people actually using public transport. Now, more benefits in addition to providing their services. So this is, once again, manage the demand, right? Instead of people driving their own cars, well, they take buses, because taking buses is more reliable. Now, sometimes you get stuck, sometimes you don't. But if you're taking bus, you are sure that it's going to take 30 minutes to get there. Always, because there is no traffic jam. Alternate work schedule, I mentioned it earlier. So people can work at home, people can work at different times, starting time, finish time in a day. So that's managing the demand. Promoting bicycle use. So how do we promote bicycle use? We provide a bicycle lane, right? But because one of the concerns of those people actually riding bicycle is safety. So if we mix it with cars, well, it's more dangerous, more risks. But if we have bicycle lanes provided, which means vehicles, other motor vehicles can't get into the lane, so we'll make it much safer. So this is the way we do it. That's why you see there are bicycle lanes along the Georgetown Road, Invermay Road. Huh? Car sharing, pooling, I'll go back to that one. High occupancy vehicles. Now, for private cars, most of the time you only find the driver only inside the car, and many times, high percentage of those cars, single passenger in a car. So there are technologies that allow actually to recognize number of passengers in the cars. So those passengers say, well, there can be a requirement, the standard here. If vehicles with 4 passengers, at least 4 passengers, can use certain lanes, so they have those speed lanes much faster, then this actually encourage people to share their cars instead of they just always drive their own cars. Car sharing and pooling. This is once again related to this high occupancy vehicles. Now the main thing here is reduce the number of vehicles on the road. If instead of having 4 cars, well, you just have 1 car, so you take actually 3 cars off the road. Enhancing pedestrian lanes areas, so we encourage people to actually walk. But how do we do this? Encourage similar to bicycle lanes, we provide those safe areas for people to actually walk around. And in the city center, once again, well, small town like Launceston, we have pedestrian lanes, so not allow those areas, not allow actually motor vehicles get into those areas. And there are many cities that have those areas where only passengers are allowed, not vehicles. Improving public transit, of course, we need to provide the alternative, the option for people to actually change their behavior. Parking management. Well, parking is a big thing, and sometimes it could be extremely expensive in those larger cities. So manage parking, once again, can actually control the demand, the demand of the transport side. Later on, I'll give you some more points on that one, parking. Pricing. Well, people respond to process. Well, you still remember we have the diagram to show. We have a term, what we call the term. There's a terminology we use to describe how consumers respond to price change. What's the term? A term we used to describe how consumers respond to price change. What is the term? Well, the term is elasticity. So the price, people can be elastic, will respond to a price change or not, or to less extent. So therefore, the pricing is an instrument to manage demand. So if there is too high demand, we actually charge more, increase the price, or increase the cost of using that service. Now, this is different from when you look at the airfares. Well, during the weekend, you see high airfare. This is not a means to actually, with the main objective of higher price airfares during the weekend, is not to manage demand. It's more their business strategy where business airlines can charge more for the same service. But pricing control in this sense here is because the demand could exceed the actual resource we have. So therefore, we increase the price with the purpose of managing the demand. So vehicle licenses, for example, in Singapore and in some other countries, it becomes extremely expensive, and sometimes the cost of license is more expensive than the car. So you spend $100,000 to buy a car, but it costs you probably $150,000 to get the license. What do? Well, you remove lots of people from owning their own cars. High cost of parking. In some areas, parking can be extremely expensive, right? It costs you probably over $10 an hour in some areas. So while we have this, well, one thing, this is obviously a business strategy because the supply is limited. Another thing here is obviously the effect of managing the demand. So it's too expensive, so people choose other means. So they don't go there, or they simply choose public transport because parking is too expensive. Cordon pricing. What I mean by cordon pricing? Well, we have certain areas where when you get into that area, you need to pay for it. Now, once again, London, Singapore are the examples. There are areas where, most likely in the CBD area, now every time a vehicle gets into those area, restricted area, they have to pay. Now, this is different from congestion pricing. Congestion pricing is also a price increase, or there is a charge for it. There is a charge for it, but not in the restricted area, but rather in different hours. So most likely, peak hours. So in peak hours, if vehicles are going through those areas during the peak hours, there will be charges or more charges, more high prices. So this is congestion pricing as versus cordon pricing. These two are different. Imposition of tolls on highways and bridges. Obviously, toll on bridges and highways sometimes it's just a commercial strategy where the cost of providing the infrastructure needed to be recovered. So therefore, tolls. But also it's a means of actually regulating the demand. Carbon tax, I'll put a question mark here. Well, we've been sort of talking about carbon taxes, not just in the area of transport, but other areas, manufacturing as well. So this is something also can be possible, have effect on the demand, right? So managing transport systems, this is probably more to do with the supply side. RTS, this is not RTS, this unit, name of this unit, Intelligent Transport System. This is Intelligent Transport System. Well, this is the overall terminology. It doesn't refer to a particular thing. It's an overall term to describe that where we have a system consisting of the technology used and to actually improve the efficiency, improve the safety of road infrastructure or transport systems rather. So we have those certain components of intelligent transport system. Now the term actually appeared many years ago, probably more than 20 years ago. But it's once again, it's evolving. We never say reach to that point. We always continuously improve the intelligence of the transport system we have. So advanced computing technology. Now when we say advanced computing technology, well, the technology itself evolving all the time, continuously evolving the time. Well, one thing we can say, well, the computing capability. How do we actually compute or analyze the data we're receiving from the next point, sensor, from the sensors or the sensing technology? So sensing technology, the main purpose of sensors or sensing technology is to collect the data. But with the data, well, it doesn't do any good if you just collecting data. We need to analyze. And how do we analyze it? We use the former computing technology. And we needed to analyze it extremely fast. And we needed to develop those algorithms to actually come up with different information for us to make decisions. And this need to be real time. This need to be real time. Global positioning system. Well, this is just once again, this is the overall terminology to say, well, we know at any given time, real time, the position of the vehicles on roads. Or in shipping, we know exactly the real time of those ships any given time. So this is a system that we have to actually to know the position, exact position. Now this once again, this is a very important piece of information required to be analyzed with computing technology. And with those, we have data collection, we have analysis, and then we need to communicate the results, the outcome. So we have communication technology. So this is the whole. So we collect the data, we analyze it, then we provide the outcome. Right? So we provide advice to the people on roads. We can actually take some examples, the applications of the intelligent systems. So automatic traffic control, for example, mainly is to facilitate the movement of traffic using real-time adaptive coordination of traffic signals. So the traffic signals, well, there are lots of science behind traffic signals. So it's not just to say, well, we have traffic lights, every 20 seconds it will switch from red to green, and the green light will stay for 30 seconds, and always like this. It's not. No, it's not the case. It's not the case. It's not simple like this. And then much can be done actually to optimize the signal, traffic signal, in order to actually improve the use of the infrastructure, especially in peak hours. Now, simple example like what we have normally is, well, in the daytime, you have the traffic actually pretty much regulated. There is a system, the algorithm behind the lights, the traffic lights control. But in nighttime, sensors are actually used. It's different. Well, if you next time when you drive, you just get a feeling out of it. In the nighttime, it's about sensors because the traffic is much less. So you don't necessarily need to wait. Normally, you need to wait 30 seconds for the next light. But it's through sensor because there's no traffic on the other side. So you go there and the sensor got, okay, well, there's a traffic coming, there's a vehicle coming, so they change the light straight away. Now this is very simple, but in large cities, this is a big science, this is huge science behind. Okay? Well, here we just say automatic traffic control, but it relates to lots of actually science behind the data collection, analyze, computing technology, and then lots of algorithm to calculate. It's not just a single intersection. It's hundreds of intersections on the road, streets, and come up with the best solution. Driver information system, well, obviously this is right to drivers, provided the traffic conditions so you can make a decision early enough to avoid yourself get into the traffic. Electric tool collection, well, this is older technology, been there for a long time. So instead of you stop, you have to stop at every time when you get into a toll highway. You just drive as normal because it's electronically collect the vehicle information and you will be charged. Freight, on the freight side, those applications in general, but we also have those specific systems for freight. So freight management system, improve the reliability, service quality, efficiency, etc. Now many larger companies on the road transport sector, those road freight companies, they have those software system to help them to best utilize their assets. So the assets you have are a cost factor, and what do? You try to make the best use of your assets. So if you have 20 vehicles, trucks, you always want to use them as long as you can, as much capacity as you can. So therefore, you maximize the use, so you maximize your revenue, and much of that cost is fixed. So your drivers, if you have 20 vehicles, you have 20 drivers, for example. Well, regardless of whether they are doing something or they are stopped somewhere, you pay them the same rate. You can't just say, well, today you come in, okay, you worked 5 hours, so I'll pay 5 hours of rate. And the next day, well, you worked 8 hours, so I'll pay you 8 hours. No, it's different. Unless you have casuals, but otherwise, there is a fixed cost. So therefore, the better we utilize the assets and also the labor you have, obviously the better. Advanced traveler information system. This is not just to do with the road traffic condition, but also other possible information you need as a traveler. Okay. Potential benefits. Well, better utilization of the infrastructure to start with. This is a high level because this will affect the decision, high level decision in terms of whether we need to actually provide additional infrastructure or how we can improve the use of current infrastructure. Improve the traffic flow, so the infrastructure remains the same, but we can improve if we use RTS. Better service from public transport, enhance the safety, well, that's all to do with more smoother traffic. Low cost of freight transport, low cost of freight transport, reduce the environmental impact. We discussed last week. When we have frequent stop, slow traffic, there will be more fuel consumption and high emission. There's a link for you. This is about Australia. So policy framework for intelligent transport system in Australia. You can follow the link and get the document. Have a read. And that's pretty much what we have. Any questions? Any questions? Okay. Now, we finished all the modules, 12 modules, and we have one more tutorial next week. And also the next week we will have a revision of the entire unit to help you prepare the exam. Now for that one, don't just come with a question and say, well, I want to know what questions will be in the exam. You know the answer. We're not going to give you the questions. We can't. So come instead with some specific questions. I'll provide you some general information for your exam. This is going to be city exam, course book. It's different from the quiz, so you can't bring anything. You basically have your pen, and that's pretty much it. But you come with specific questions. So as long as you ask questions, even that particular question is in the exam, I will answer you. Right? I will help you. So bring some questions to ask next week. Okay? Or any questions you may have to do with the unit or to do with the exam. But for now, you have overall, because you still have, most likely you still have 40% left in the exam. And if you already finish or submit all your assignment, you probably have a couple of days of break. Tomorrow is a public holiday. Probably you go somewhere and forget your study. Now you do need some sort of break, but this is time when you come back to your units, whatever units you enrolled, and have a plan to look at, to arrange your revision, because you have 4 units, and if you have 4 exams, you have the timetable already, right? You need to understand your timetable, the venue, and you arrange. You have come up with a plan for your revision. Okay?
Quick question.
Yeah.
We will get our assignment 3 back.
Yeah, your assignment. Yes, good question. Your assignment, will most likely will be released, if not during the weekend, will be probably early next week, probably Monday or Tuesday. You will have that result. Okay? But now, don't worry about your assignment. Your assignment being done, already done, submitted, but obviously you want go back to look at it, so how you perform, you will get this, but don't worry about too much. Say how many marks you have got from your assignment. Okay, think about your exam. Okay. Now, when you once you receive your assignment, now this is another thing I want to say. Guys, just bear with me for a minute. Okay, guys, listen to me. Just a minute. When you receive your assignment result, not just my unit but other unit as well, don't just look at the marks. Look at the comments in your assignment as well as the overall comment in the whatever it looks like, what I normally call the assessment sheet. You have the comment overall and the rubric. Look at those, and for me, the requirement of marking for me, if I'm marking, the minimum would be say, well, if you have 65, a credit 65, and you will know why you got a 65 and how you can improve in order for you to achieve 70%. So I'll tell you which part you probably haven't done very well, you missed something, and if you do this, next time will be better. So look at this, because this is how you improve. Next time you'll be better, right? Or next semester you'll be better. So look at those comments, and if you have any questions, problems, come to your lecture. In this unit, come to me, say, well, I don't agree with this. Well, I'll go through the assignment with you, and if there's something not marked properly, I'll adjust it. As I said, so the assignments will be marked by someone else, a PhD student who already submitted the thesis. So good quality. I provided four pages of guidelines, the guide for marking the assignment. But I'll look at the marked assignment before I release them. But if you do have any questions, just come to me. Okay? All right. I'll see you next week.
Cái kiểu gì mà đi